What's up guys, MaksWerks here, and today we're going to be doing a review of the 2008 Suzuki M109R that I'm riding. And so before we jump into the wonderful details of this bike, let me give you the quick technical spec sheet. Get that out of the way. I'm sitting on a throbbing 1800, actually 1763cc V-twin, driving a 5-speed manual into a shaft drive to the rear wheel. This bike supposedly makes about 85 plus pound-feet of torque, pretty much all of it off of idle, and about 110 horsepower, but that's not really the point. And it's sitting on a 130 millimeter front and a 240 millimeter rear tire. Let's see, I got 2 pistons with on each caliper, 2 calipers in the front, 1 in the rear. And that's pretty much it. Regular cruiser type suspension without anything fancy going on. And that's pretty much it for technical specs. So let me show you what the bike looks like on the outside. Cue video now. So here's the M109 walk around, and the first thing that really pops to mind is this thing sort of resembles a brontosaurus mixed with a spaceship and a futuristic movie from the 60s. Everything about it is just big. It's like extra large, but you can see it's got smooth, kind of futuristic floating lines, and it's definitely not out of place in the city or cruising down a country highway. It's really kind of a handsome brute in its own right. Alright, so you guys know what this looks like, and the term that really comes to mind is lead sled. It makes me think of like a 50s, maybe even a late 40s, big sweetback Buick slammed down on some juicy torque wheels. You know what I'm talking about? Aired out to the max. Anyway, they say that that your strength is judged by, or the quality of a man is judged by the strength of his enemies. And I think the truth applies to bikes as well. You know, so let's see. There's really only one motorcycle that competes with the M109R. There's nothing else really, and that's the Harley V-Rod. So Harley Davidson released the V-Rod in like 2002 or 2003 or something like that, and then Suzuki followed up with this bad boy. I think the first year was 06. The V-Rod makes about 10% less power and has about 500 cc's less displacement. And I rode a V-Rod, brand new one, at a Harley dealer about 2 years ago. So my memory is kind of foggy as to it, but it seems to handle a lot like this bike, and I don't really remember there being anything about wow factor about the Harley. So let's just move right along. I like to start out with some of the negative aspects, so we can just get that out of the way. I have a couple of big issues with this bike. Big issue number one is right here. If you'll notice that there is something missing that should be right here. It looks exactly like this, but it should be over here. And that is a reservoir for a hydraulic clutch. This is an 1800cc V-twin that makes most of its torque right off idle, so it's got clutch springs galore, and they're really strong. I mean, it's basically the heaviest clutch springs that you can think of because it's such a big torquey engine. But there is no hydraulic clutch, which means that you have to compress those torquey springs with your hand. There's no mechanical assist. And I'm a big strong guy. I got big strong forearms, and granted I'm a righty, not a lefty, but still, I had to sit in traffic on this bike for about 20 minutes the other day in real tight stop and go traffic, and I thought my arm was gonna fall off, because modulating this clutch in and out all the time is really, you know, stressful and hard on your hand. And the reason you don't have a hydraulic clutch is to give you more feel, but all of that is totally negated by the fact that your arm just wants to disconnect from your body and run on home. So that's niggle number one. Issue number two is It's a small one, I grant, it's a small one, but this bike has a 5-speed gearbox. Why in today's day and age everybody doesn't get a 6-speed, I don't know, but they really should. However, on this bike it's not as much of an issue as it is, say, on the Kawasaki Vulcan that I have, because that Vulcan for cruising on the highway really needs a 6th gear. This thing, not so much. And so the final issue I have with this bike is, in my opinion, it's got a little too much plastic and it's real cheap feeling. The plastic just looks cheap. It looks like, you know, something that comes out of Hollywood. It doesn't have that quality feel that the V-Rod does. But then again, this bike costs almost $5,000 less than a comparable V-Rod, brand new off the showroom floor, so it's really kind of a trade-off. Things that I'm kind of mad about are primarily the suspension. The suspension on this bike is really bargain bin, and on a 700-pound bike, you can really feel it. It really throws you up hard over big bumps. It almost feels like a hardtail in some ways, while the front end is way too soft and mushy. And so every time you hit the brakes, you get quite a bit of nosedive in the front. The other thing is, right off of idle in first gear, there is some fueling issues. I don't know if that's specifically on the 2008 and it gets better or worse with different model years, but on this bike it's a little herky-jerky, where you really want it to be smooth right there when you latch in the first gear. But that's also kind of a minor quibble. If it really bothers you, I'm sure that you can get a Pizzazz or a Power Command or something for this bike that will smooth that out for you a little bit. Doggy, doggy, doggy. Munching on a stick. But, so, let's talk about the good things, because there's lots of good things. The seating position on this bike is clamshell, and but it's really not bad. It doesn't seem to put a whole lot of stress on your back. As you can see, this right here is vibrating like crazy when we're sitting in idle. But if you look down while I'm riding around, you'll see that this bike does the same trick that Harley does, which is the engine mounts really kick in at about 2,000, 2,500 RPM, and it stops really transferring a whole lot of vibration to the rider, which makes it a lot easier to ride long distances. So let's get on the highway so we can take a look at how well this bike can cruise. So here as we're merging, I just like to point out something, that this bike is properly quick. It's almost sports bike quick, and it's not really something you expect from a 700-pound plus beast. Even with this huge power plant in it, it goes from 20 to 65, 70 in second gear, and it does it very, very quickly. You're basically hanging on for dear life. And so there's fifth gear. There's, let me back off of it a little bit. There's 70 miles an hour in fifth gear, and we're spinning at 3,000 RPM. And this bike is totally subdued right now. There's not a whole lot of vibration coming through the seat or the handlebars. I feel totally comfortable sitting on the bike. This bike obviously at some point had optional wind protection. Obviously it's a naked cruiser bike, and so all the wind is hitting me in the chest. But at the same time, it's not unpleasant. It's not buffeting me around a lot or anything like that. And this is I-35, which is, if you're going to get buffeted around, it's going to be here. But we're just rolling right along, and as you can see, I've crept all the way up to 80 without really even paying much attention to it. Again, here the suspension really kind of leaves one yearning for something a little higher grade. It really could use a better front end or a rear end or both, to be honest with you. But little bumps, it's not bad. You know, if we even in top gear, I mean, there we go. It's the acceleration is pretty much instant. So, I mean, again, I wouldn't really want to go cross country on this bike, at least not without a fairing and some more wind protection. But in terms of like making a 100-mile-an-hour run or 100-mile run down to like San Antonio or something, or even driving all the way up to Dallas, I wouldn't think twice about hopping on this bike and going. And I'm sure on the highway it probably returns some pretty decent fuel economy too, because it's not spinning very high. Yeah, it's actually not bad. Even though it's got that big rear end and those big front tire too, it doesn't wallow in the corners, and you can really lean it over pretty well, and it's very smooth. I mean, it's definitely not a sports bike, and it's definitely not my VMAX, but it's not bad at all. And like I said, it's like a sports bike. It keeps urging you to go just a little bit faster. I mean, we can go 100, right? That's not a big deal. It's just constantly pushing and pushing to go a little bit quicker. And I like that. I like that in a bike. I think that, you know, I think that's missing in a lot of bikes. Especially a lot of cruiser bikes. They're pretty boring. They want you to be boring. This bike's not boring. The other thing this bike gets full props for is the transmission. It is really snick, 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 gear, gear, gear. Never any trouble finding neutral. Never any hesitation. Never any real clunking like you'd expect from a big cruiser bike. It's almost like they put a sport bike transmission in a cruiser. In my opinion, the most interesting thing about this bike isn't the bike itself. It's more the kind of guy that would buy this. And I'm not sexist even remotely, but I'm going to say this right now. Ladies, this is not for you. The clutch is super hard. The bike is real heavy. Yeah, it has a low saddle height, but it still requires quite a bit of balance. And if you don't have long legs, you're going to burn the crap out of yourself on the exhaust pipe. So I'm going to assume that the majority of these bad boys are probably sold to middle-aged men, because at $13,000 it's not what you would call a cheap cruiser, especially considering it has fairly limited function. Ow, that's what I'm saying. Like on like say my Speed Triple, that bump would have hardly been noticeable, but on this thing it's like bam, pow, right in the kidneys. It's just not a great suspension. Anyway, the guy that buys this bike, so you're probably middle-aged, probably recently divorced, because, or you're heading that way, because, like I said, at 13 grand, you could buy a leader bike sports bike, and I think a lot of people would really prefer that. You know, a lot of younger guys would really prefer that. Or you could buy a myriad of other bikes that are going to be either A, more convenient, B, cheaper, or C, easier to ride. Because here's the thing, this bike is not easy to ride. Like for instance, the Kawasaki Vulcan I reviewed some time back, that bike is easy to ride. I mean, if you can reach the ground, you can ride that bike, no question. This bike is not easy to ride, and I don't know if it's just the enormous rear tire or the moderately crummy suspension, but this bike is hard, especially hard to corner. It requires a lot of constant vigilance because it tends to wander a little bit. Again, probably because of the ridiculous sized tires. But, so the guy that buys this, right, he's probably balding, probably about 40, 45, heading to divorce, maybe had some bikes when he was a kid, maybe not. But it's like, this bike just screams midlife crisis. The plastics are huge and gaudy, and unnecessarily so. The engine makes a deep thrumble. It could have gotten by, like I said, it doesn't make much more power than the V-Rod, but it has an 1800cc engine. Who the hell needs an 1800cc engine? Honda Civics used to come with a 1.6 liter engine. Like, you know, what the hell? But, and it's not a confidence-inspiring bike. You know, you don't hop onto this and all of a sudden your dick gets bigger. Everybody, it's like having a giant lifted truck to run to the supermarket with. You're overcompensating for something. And as I ride this bike around, I imagine people looking at me and thinking, damn, that guy, he's compensating for something. The truth is, I picked this bike up for $750 and I fixed it, and now I'm going to sell it and make some money. That's pretty much the only thing I'm compensating for. But it definitely has that appeal, or that feel of, you know, either you're trying really hard to make up for something you don't have, or you're just like the hair gel wearing gold bracelet douchey McPants. You know, the guy who refers to his penis as the lead sled, you know, or other stuff like that. You know, he would ride this bike every day, and he would tell people that he rode this bike. Like, hey baby, you want to check out my M109R? That's right, 1800 cc's. It's like, it's just not necessary. But, you know, as I ride the bike and as I put some miles on it, it's not bad. There's not, like I said, other than the little fueling issue and the lack of hydraulic clutch, the motorcycle as a motorcycle isn't bad. It's certainly not something I would ever buy for myself under any circumstances, but it definitely appeals to a certain kind of person and a certain kind of riding, and that's city riding. This is the bike that you take down to the bars so that you can park it out front and let everybody stare. And when people are like, oh yeah, you know, is that a Harley? Nah, it's a Suzuki. It's an M109R. It's like, okay. I mean, the guy who owned this was like real hard up about stuff. Like, it's got an air horn on it. You know, I'm not going to honk it right now because it wouldn't be nice, but I have an air horn. Because that's all this 700-pound, 100-pound-foot of torque, 16 feet long motorcycle needs to announce its presence is an air horn. The funny thing is this bike is a nice silver shade, a rather subdued silver, if I may. Whereas if you look around, most of these M109Rs you see for sale are like candy colors, and that's how they came from the factory. They came in pearlescent white and bright yellow and, you know, orangutan orange or whatever. You know, they came in actually, I guess all their colors probably, it's like power yellow, power red, power orange, you know, whatever. But I would say final grade, I would give this bike probably a 6 out of 10. And not only would I give it a 6 out of 10, but I would also not let any of my friends ride it. Like, because unless you have a considerable bit of experience with bigger, heavier bikes like I do, this thing is really easy to drop. It's really not that great of a bike. I mean, it just isn't, as much as I wanted it to. Because the truth about me is that I secretly have a chubby for bikes that represent what this bike represents. I love my VMAX. I would love to get a second gen VMAX. The idea of a cruiser bike that can hang on, you know, with 600s and 750s is awesome, in my opinion. I secretly harbor a love for badass cruisers. I really do. And as much as I want to love this bike, as much as I'm willing to look past the crummy suspension and the gaudy plastics, the driving dynamics just aren't there. All this bike really has is colossal amounts of torque right off of idle, and that's it. It's like a one-trick pony. And after you do a few highway pulls, you know, you get to the point where it's like, I spent 13 grand for this. And, you know, it's just, maybe it's just this bike disappointed me. I mean, it's a great bike. It runs great. This specific model is perfect. And I wouldn't say that I would suggest someone not buy an M109R. But unless you came to me and said, I have exactly $13,000, I want the most powerful, ridiculous cruiser that I can buy for $13,000, I would say that would be the M109R, sir. And to be honest with you, I've ridden the V-Rod and I wasn't impressed, and I'd never recommend a V-Rod to somebody. I mean, I guess if you're going to throw away like 15 G's, you might as well buy the V-Rod, because it probably has better resale value and probably gets you more cougars who are like, ooh, is that a Harley? Ooh, Harley. You know, the Harley boys, they'll love you. They won't love you for this, but they will love you for the V-Rod. So, you know, if you really need a status symbol of a bike that's not that great to ride, I would say go with the V-Rod. Spend a little extra, get the V-Rod. But you know, that's why this bike gets like a 5.5, 6 out of 10. Because I wouldn't own it. I mean, I'll make my profit on it, but I won't own it. And that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you like this review. I know some people were really looking forward to it, and I'm sorry if this bike didn't turn out, and this review didn't turn out to be quite as snazzy as I'm sure some of you hoped. But, you know, that's it. That's all I got. So at this point, I'm just going to have to sit around and wait for the DMV and stuff to open again so that I can get a title for this bike. And then I'll detail it and sell it. Thanks, guys. Ride safe.